Okay, everybody, sing along if you know the words. My name is Jeremy, and you are watching the Morgue. Yes, today is a very musical edition of the show, although I promise that's all the singing I will do. I won't put you through that anymore. I'm sorry. I'm going to be covering three very different topics on today's episode. Now, the meat of today's episode, what you probably are all tuning in for, is to see some of the picks of the top MMO soundtracks in existence, which is going to be a great segment, but I'm putting that off until the final segment of the show. Prior to that, I'm also going to do a little bit of a shout out for some noteworthy composers that have contributed to the world of video game and MMO music over the years. And before we even get to talking about them, I'll first be covering a few innovative music-related mechanics that have shown up in the MMO industry over the past couple of years. You see, guys, music is important, and video game music has started to become more and more popular over the recent few years, including things like Video Games Live taking a more popular center stage spot among modern symphonic concerts, and websites and communities around things like OC Remix are just taking off gangbusters. People love video game music, and I don't think it's just because it's been around long enough to get the following. I think that people are finally starting to acknowledge the fact that music contained in a video game is just as great as anything contained in a music or television show, or even just plain old symphonic classical music on its own. Even to the point that the Grammys now have a category for video game music. So this whole episode is just going to basically be a celebration of that fact that video game music, and MMO music in particular, is important, is worthy of notice, and deeply enjoyable. So, without further ado, let's talk about some of these musical innovations. There are three primary ones that I want to cover, all of which, interestingly enough, come from free-to-play games. The first of these comes from APB, which allows users the option to import their own music libraries directly into the game. Now, this on its own doesn't sound like too big of a deal. I mean, how easy is it to just turn off the music in-game, load up iTunes or Winamp in the background, and listen to your own playlist as much as you like? But this is where Gamers First actually gets it right, because instead of having you override the in-game music with your own selections played on your own computer locally, by uploading your music directly into the game, you're actually contributing to the experience of yourself and your fellow players being a part of the world of Sanparo. And this is done by scrobbling. It's a term that basically means scanning your music as you upload it, using an engine supplied by Last.fm, and applying tags automatically to it based on the sounds that are included in the music, the rhythm, the beats, the type of instrumentation. All of that is automatically determined by this genius music system on the back end as you import your library. Now, that on its own, if all you're doing is playing solo, is not that big of a deal, but where it gets really interesting is where other players become involved. You see, as you're walking down the street in Sanparo, you might hear another player drive by in a car playing something from their own playlist. If you happen to have that same song in your playlist, you'll hear that song coming from their car. But if you don't, that's where the scrobbling kicks in, because let's say they're playing Lady Gaga, but your playlist consists exclusively of Frank Sinatra. So while that player driving their car by might be playing Born This Way, you'll instead hear My Way, based solely on the behind-the-scenes scrobbling of it. So not only do you get the option to listen to the music that you like to listen to, you are also treated to other players basically using their personalities to pick which music you hear from them. And all of this allows you to bypass the concept of being stuck to the game's soundtrack, which I know a lot of you wrote in and said you don't listen to the music in the game. So this might be exactly the kind of mechanic that's right up your alley. This isn't the sole musical innovation to come out of APB, however. They also have a system called a theme creator. Now, these themes consist of about, I think it's between 5 and 8 seconds worth of music, which can actually be created in the game itself. Now, these themes are not something that only you hear, however. They're actually played on your opponent's computer, right through their speakers or headphones, whenever you manage to smear their face across the pavement. Kind of a musical cue that neener neener, I got you. And let me tell you, as a part-time player of APB, one that has had my own brain smeared across the entire landscape of Sanparo, it's really nice to hear so much variation in the actual themes used by players. I've heard things like Super Mario Bros., Zelda, Metroid, as well as more popular titles like Welcome to the Jungle, Highway to Hell, all sorts of stuff. Now, they're MIDI, but they're really nice in terms of sound quality and production. The downside to this system is that it's got an interface that's extremely difficult to use. The learning curve is very steep, and it wouldn't be surprising for you to spend hours and hours creating your very first theme worthy of being used and published in the game. On the other hand, if you get really good at it, you can actually save these and publish them and sell them to fellow players that they can use in the game for in-game cash, not real-life money. But that means that your character in-game can actually make a meager living as a musician. How great is that? Now, speaking of game mechanics that actually allow you to be an in-game musician, let's now talk a little bit about Lord of the Rings Online's music system. I had this brought up to me a number of times by different commenters, so I know that there's quite a few out there that are familiar with this, but let me explain it to you anyway in a nutshell. What this does is translates your keyboard keystrokes directly into music inside the game. Whenever your avatar equips a certain type of instrument, it changes all of your inputs into notes. So as you press a key, you hear a note in the game. And not just you either, and not just your team or not just your guild, but everybody nearby hears this ambient music coming from your avatar in-game. Meaning that very simply, you can pick up a guitar and start creating any sort of cacophonous den that you feel is necessary or appropriate, and everybody nearby will be forced to listen to it. Although you may find that many players turn off the ability to hear other people playing in newbie zones. Now, what if you're not an actual musician yourself? What if tapping the keys to make your own music is just beyond your abilities, but you have a good ear for it? Maybe you could even write music. Well, fear not, because the Lord of the Rings system actually includes a scripting language that's been called ABC, which allows text files written in a specific syntax to be parsed by the game's engine and come across to the client as music. ABC is actually really easy to learn how to use and allows you to perform all sorts of things that because of server lag or fat fingers or what have you, you might not actually be able to perform live. But if you make an ABC file out of it, you can just load that up in game and boom, you are a maestro. Now I should warn you that there's quite a large population of Lord of the Rings Online's players that get a little elitist about ABC scripting because it's so easy to write and because the capability exists that you can download these scripts from other people. So you might have zero musical talent yourself, but because you found an ABC script online and downloaded it and played it, you make yourself look better. Well, ignore the haters. Have fun. It's music. It's meant there to be fun. Now, this particular feature has been a huge boon to the Lord of the Rings Online's role-playing community because, as some of you might know, Tolkien's world is rich with music. The books, and to a lesser degree even the movies, include many references to music sung and performed by the races, by the communities that are included in the world of Tolkien itself. It's a big thing. So people that are fans of the Tolkien world have wholeheartedly embraced this music system and the ability to perform their music for other players in-game, not just as part of the role-playing experience, but just as gamers, as people that like to get together and play in a Tolkien world. To such degree that they've actually developed an annual Woodstock type event where musicians from around the server get together and perform together at Weathertop, and it's appropriately termed Weatherstock. I believe there's actually a performance coming up soon, so I'll try to have some information about that in our show notes. Now, as I said earlier, both APB and Lord of the Rings Online are free to play right now, so if either of these sets of mechanics interests you, I think it's worth a download to at least check them out. It costs you nothing but time and bandwidth. Alright, now with some of those academics out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some noteworthy composers that have contributed to MMO music in particular, and video game music as a whole. Now, these people did not have their soundtracks show up in our best of MMO soundtracks, but I still felt that they themselves were worthy of a special mention. Each of the following artists has been putting music into our ear holes for years. Most of them have been working for more than a decade in the realm of video game music, but have also made heavy contributions to the world of MMO music. The first of these that I'd like to introduce you to is Tracy W Bush. Tracy's primary contribution to the world of MMO music was as one of the first composers included on the World of Warcraft soundtrack, having first honed his skills in this particular world by contributing to both the soundtracks of Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness, and Warcraft 3, Frozen Throne. He later worked as audio director on Tabula Rasa, Auto Assault, and DC Universe Online. And although Bush is an accomplished musician and composer, he is perhaps most famously known, for better or worse, for his voiceover work, including, notoriously, as the voice of the Murlocs. Over the years, he has also performed the voice of many of the characters in StarCraft, Warcraft 3, and in DC Universe Online, including Ambush Bug, Booster Gold, Calculator, and many more. The next noteworthy composer I'd like to introduce you to is a man by the name of, and I apologize if I pronounce this wrong, Enon Zur. who is perhaps most well known in the MMO world for his contributions to the soundtracks of Lineage 2 and Rift. However, beyond the MMO industry, he is perhaps more well known for his iconic contributions to some of the most beloved single-player games of all time, including Baldur's Gate 2, Icewind Dale 2, Crysis, Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, Dragon Age Origins, and Dragon Age 2. His work on these titles have more than helped to shape the current image of video game music as something more than just the bloops and bleeps that we once tolerated. His compositions have been nominated for dozens of awards and earned recognition and respect far beyond just us gamers. And I've included a few examples of them in our show notes if you'd like to check them out directly. And the final of the composers that I'd like to shine a spotlight on for this particular episode really is a man that needs no introduction within the world of video game music. In fact, it would probably be better if I didn't introduce him because I know I'm going to butcher this name. I apologize, sir. Nobuo Uematsu. If the name doesn't ring a bell, shame on you, sir. Shame on you. This man is responsible for the entire soundtrack of every single Final Fantasy game in existence, except Final Fantasy 12 and 13. But that also includes the soundtracks to both MMOs Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV. Uematsu's distinctive sounds have left a mark on the Final Fantasy and the RPG franchise that cannot be mistaken. From his horn-heavy fanfares to percussive pseudo-tribal tributes to village life to chant-like laments featuring full vocal choruses, almost every piece he composes evokes memories of past adventures in the various worlds that he helped to create. His work on Final Fantasy XI was lauded for his cinematic emotional depth, while Final Fantasy XIV has frequently been accused of sounding derivative and lazy compared to some of his earlier work. Nonetheless, his contributions to the world of MMO music and video game music as a whole simply cannot be denied, and there's a good reason that many refer to this man as a legend among video game composers. I received so many great suggestions for this particular segment. So many, in fact, that there is absolutely no way that I'll be able to cover everything that was sent my way. So what I've done here is compiled some of the best suggestions that got either multiple recommendations or that had a specific impact on me when I went through and listened to the samples that were sent my way. Now, I should clarify up front that this is by no means a definitive list of the absolute best. In fact, I don't even actually want to say which of these four I'm going to be talking about are considered the best, because I just don't do that. I think all of them are worthy of that particular position, so it's going to be up to you guys to interpret which one you like the best of all of these. So, without further ado, let's cover the top 4 MMO soundtracks. The soundtrack to Guild Wars features the genius of one composer named Jeremy Soule, who is also the composer of such hits as Elder Scrolls Oblivion, Morrowind, Neverwinter Nights, and over 60 other video game soundtracks. Jeremy Soule has been described as the John Williams of video game music and is one of the most acclaimed video composers still working in the business, with more than half a dozen prestigious awards decorating his shelves and several more nominations as well. Each of the expansion packs for Guild Wars have featured complete soundtracks, all of which Soule has created all on his own. To date, this library spans hundreds and hundreds of hours and includes rich and diverse compositions that vary from soaring orchestral epics to simple one or two instrumental compositions, some of which were even performed by Soule himself. And, as if all of that music wasn't enough of an offering for Guild Wars fans, he also sells musical expansion packs for Guild Wars via a service called Direct Song. And according to recent reports, almost 10% of the overall subscription base of Guild Wars have purchased at least one of these expansion songs. So it's easy to see that his work is beloved by those that have experienced it. The songs of Guild Wars are too varied to review in a 1 or 2 sentence soundbite, and truly must be heard to be appreciated. I've included links to 3 of the major expansions overtures as an example of some of the diverse introductions players of this title have been treated to over the years, and would highly encourage any music fans out there to click and enjoy. The Age of Conan soundtrack is rich and completely evocative of the incredible worlds and cultures created in the original Conan novels and comics. This soundtrack was sadly buried by being attached to the substandard launch of one of the biggest disappointments in recent MMO history. Sadly, the soundtrack can be a bit bleak overall, as there are very few happy or upbeat tunes included among the batch, which has turned some off from the compositions of the past. The entire soundtrack is composed by Knut Avnstrup Haugen, who won an IFMCA award in 2008 for this outstanding original score. It also features the alluring vocal talents of Helena Boxley, a known actress-singer from Norway, and in a strange twist, the CD version of the soundtrack also bears 3 bonus tracks performed by the Norwegian punk metal group Turbo Negro, including one they composed especially for Age of Conan. Listening to the soundtrack for this game was an absolutely joyous experience, having never actually played the game myself. Now that Age of Conan has moved to a free-to-play subscription model, I intend to pick it up for another round in the near future based solely on listening to this jaw-droppingly epic soundtrack. So, look forward to a re-review of this game on a future episode of the Morgue, inspired entirely by music. Up until a recent expansion pack, Everquest 2's entire body of award-winning work was solely credited to Laura Cartman. Since that time, Enon Zur has taken up the reins, whom I spoke of earlier as attached to Lineage and Dragon Age. For the purposes of this episode, I'd like to limit my opinions to the soundtrack that accompanied the original game that shipped at the time of release. Cartman has a masterful understanding of different instruments and the emotions and atmosphere they can evoke in different combinations, and she uses this skill and understanding to create some of the most diverse and interesting musical compositions that I've heard in any MMO setting. I feel as though nearly every piece of music from EverQuest 2 successfully transports players to the locales that the music was crafted for, whether that be a shipwrecked beach beset by goblins, a forgotten city that's become a tomb for ghosts and worse, or even a magical shrine of divine origins. It was during the course of my research for this show that I found out Cartman had moved on from the project, and I feel that that is a big loss for the future of EverQuest 2. Although Enon Zur is an incredible musician in his own right, Cartman has created this world and is an intrinsic part of the musical experience that players enjoy while traveling across the face of Norath. I almost did not put Wrath of the Lich King on this list for a couple reasons. One is that it's so obvious, and I was hoping that this episode would open folks' eyes to games beyond their existing scope. And the second reason is that more than 36 different composers actually worked on WoW over the years. That, in my opinion, lessens the impact that each overall soundtrack can have when you consider that it's a culmination of some of the best work that more than 30 different musicians have cobbled together. Meanwhile, games like Final Fantasy and Guild Wars feature soundtracks from a single creative mind. The comparative depth of talent there is astounding. Nonetheless, I've got to give credit where it's due. I was invited to the Wrath of the Lich King beta approximately 2 months prior to its release, and over those following 2 months absolutely fell in love with the diverse, cinematic, and epic score that was attached to the continent of Northrend. By the time release came around, I went halvesies with a buddy of mine to buy the collector's edition of the game, giving him everything from the box, except the soundtrack CD, which I still own to this day. The track features everything from solemn bagpipe hymns punctuated with flowing streams and birdsong, to epic discordant fanfares that would rally the undead into battle, to ethereal dream songs heralding the mystical dragon flights, while at the same time featuring a heavy dose of the cathedral-esque choirs that the Alliance soundtracks are known for, and the tribal ferocity of the Horde's music. This soundtrack has it all, and it never fails to wholly embody the content that it was created for. And while these 4 titles comprise what I've come to consider some of the best MMORPG soundtracks currently existing in the world, they have their roots running very deeply into the past. And several of you that sent in suggestions brought up games that we no longer play anymore. And so, in the interest of nostalgia, I've included several links in our show notes to songs from those games of yore. If you'd like to take a trip down memory lane, I would encourage you to check out our show notes and click on some of the links. I've included soundtracks from the original Everquest, Meridian 59, Ultima Online, and the short-lived but much beloved Earth and Beyond. That's all we have for this edition of The Morgue. I hope you've all enjoyed this special episode, dedicated entirely to the musical geniuses behind the MMO industry and video games as a whole. When we get back into the regular swing of things, sharing with you the latest news on evolution and innovations in the MMO industry next week on The Morgue. So until then, everybody, play smart and play with a song in your heart. Or your ear. It's easier to hear if it's in your ear, really.
Now, the moment you have all been waiting for. The top MMORPG soundtracks of all time.
No, I'm not going to do that.